Hey everybody, and welcome to another video. So, subject of today's video, it's a little bit long. It's how to recognize when you've stayed in an emotionally abusive relationship for too long, and how to avoid having to wait until you stayed in an emotionally abusive relationship for too long. So there's two parts to it. And like I said, I'm talking about emotional abuse, okay? I'm not talking about physical abuse. If somebody is physically abusing you, there's no question it's time to get out. But emotional abuse is different because we've all had different layers of this throughout our life. We've all been in a relationship where maybe we didn't even realize we were being emotionally abused until the relationship was over. But more often than not, at some point, we realize that this is happening. And I'm not only talking about love relationships, I'm talking about friend relationships, and it can be with your family as well. That's for certain. So, what happens overwhelmingly is that, the person who is the subject of the abuse, they might try to call things out in the beginning and then they get shut down. And what happens over a period of time, oddly, is that the more that this abuse comes, and then maybe you bring it up to them and they acknowledge it and they want to work on it, the longer it goes on, the more hope that you get that the situation is going to resolve. And each time, it might get a little bit worse, and they promise a little bit better, and things seem to be a little bit better, but then it takes a backslide again. Now, that doesn't always happen. Sometimes you're being emotionally abused, and the person doing it, or the people doing it, will simply tell you that they're not doing anything wrong, that it's in your imagination, and so on. And then that's like a double whammy, right? Because you know in your head what they're doing and what you're feeling about it, and when they will not even acknowledge having done it, there's nowhere to go with that. So, inevitably, what happens is we end up in these relationships, and it just progressively gets worse. And there's a couple of things that really end up being the end of those relationships, okay? Obviously, the person that gets abused just eventually gets sick of it and says, I can't take this anymore, and finally leaves. The other way that can be recognized is you finally get to a point where you realize that this is not your issue, but it is the other person's issue. So sometimes when you leave the abusive relationship, there is this self-blame where you feel like maybe you could have handled things a little bit differently, and then sometimes you just finally get to a point where you realize that this person, this is just how they're wired, this is just how they are and who they are, and they're not going to change regardless. And so it can become pretty difficult to determine when that time is. And that's the hardest part, is that it's different for everybody. You might end up in a relationship for 24 years, and still be clinging to some kind of hope where somehow that person was going to change. It might be a lifelong relationship with family or friends that you still, again, are clinging to the hope that one day they're going to wake up and realize, oh, that's what I've been doing. But inevitably what ends up happening is the abuser is the one that gets hurt the most out of the thing, and it's the abuser that has to make the final decision to cut the cord and end the relationship. So that can become exceedingly difficult, and then what happens is you carry that with you in your next relationships. So your new relationship sort of ends up paying for the cost of the last relationship, and around we go until you find somebody who's willing to, work with you on that. Generally, it helps if you find somebody who's had the same situation. So if you're forming a new relationship, you can both understand that, you've kind of both been through the same thing. You're going to be triggered by certain things. There's certain things that, are going to affect you. And when one person does something wrong and the other person says something, the other person can look at it and say, yeah, I can see that because I've been through that myself. Now, how do we avoid this? Well, It is a very simple technique that is exceedingly not simple. Okay, um, I've used this. To be honest with you, I used this in my relationship when I met Karen, and it's worked. We'll just put a cap on it that way. And the bottom line is that whenever you start a new relationship, whether it's a love relationship, a friend relationship, um, it's different with family, obviously, because you don't really, you can't come out of the womb and say these things. You're kind of, stuck with your family for a certain period of time. But in general, when you meet somebody new and you're forming a new relationship, it is an absolute must, 100% must, right off the bat, to set hard boundaries. And I'm not talking about soft boundaries. Well, I might put up with this a little bit and it's okay, but it's not really okay. If it is something that you have experienced in the past and you know is part of the reason why you ended or left the previous relationship, when you go into the next one, do not mess around. If you are not ready to set those boundaries, if you are not confident enough in yourself to set those hard boundaries, then you're not ready for the relationship. And that's not to disparage anybody, that's to try to help save people a lot of trouble, because if you don't set those boundaries immediately right up front in the new relationship, guess what's going to happen? The same pattern is going to play out again, only this time it's going to take a much shorter time, because you're already done with it, right? From however many years you put up with it, okay? You're already done with it. So when your new person starts to do something that even remotely reminds you of what happened to you in the past, boom, you are going to be triggered, and it's going to be way worse than it was before for you, and your new person is going to be wondering, what did I do? What did I say? Why are you reacting this way? So, like I said, it sounds like it's simple, but I know that it's not. Because, look, not everybody is looking for somebody to set hard and fast boundaries, right? Everybody's got their own things. Everybody's had something that's happened to them. So a lot of times, when you start a new relationship, the only kind of thing that you're thinking about is what you need out of it, right? So if, boundaries may not be received all that well. So it's how you broach them and how you approach them. And what you need to do is, try to make sure that that person understands first, this is what happened to me in the past. This is how I felt about it, and this is why I felt that way about it. And when you set the boundaries that way, it's not personal to your new person, okay? You're telling them what happened in the past, so it's not personal to them. And they're able to hear that then, and they're going to sympathize with you and empathize with you and realize, okay, so this person did this, and I want to make sure I'm not going to do that because it's going to have this specific effect on you. And you're telling me this up front so that if I do that, I'm going to hear it. And it's not a perfect system, don't get me wrong. But it's important and it's imperative for your own mental health that you set those boundaries right up front. And I'm not talking about like, hi, my name is Eric, and by the way, these are the list of things you can't do. Okay, I'm not, let's not be silly here. But at some point, if this is going to be a person that you're going to be in a romantic relationship with, if at all, before, you consummate the relationship, so to speak, whatever that process might be, it's really a good idea to start bringing up some of the boundaries. You don't have to immediately lay them all out up front, but lay out at least one or two of them to kind of gauge their reaction. Because if they react positively, then you've got a good person and you can tell them the rest of your boundaries and you're going to be comfortable and safe with that. If you start to tell them some of your boundaries and they're taking it back and already taking it personal, even though you're telling them it was somebody else, that's a huge red flag. Okay? If the person that you're beginning this relationship with cannot handle you setting boundaries up front, then you're not right for each other. And I would just nix it right then and there, because that's just going to lead to problems, because eventually what's going to happen is they're going to pretend to accept your boundaries in order to further the relationship. And then when they start to do the things that you've told them you will not accept, you're going to have a mess on your hands. So make sure that the person that you're choosing is not just listening, but they're hearing and receptive to your boundaries. Otherwise, you just will continue to repeat the process and eventually end up in a situation where you have no choice but basically to be a hard ass about it up front and say, this is what I will and will not handle, or end up alone, or end up accepting being in another abusive relationship. There's no in between with that. So if you want to fix those things, if you're in between relationships right now, best advice I can give you is to go back into the previous relationship or relationships you've had and attempt to find the patterns. And don't be afraid to look at yourself. Yeah, the other person has done and said and done, oh, that's fine. They've done some things. But why? And you don't have to look at it from a point of view of feeling bad for them or completely accusing them. Just look at it like you're reading a book, like they're characters in the story, and you're looking at it from the outside. Okay? Figure out why they did what they did. What were they feeling? And then, how did you play into that? Were you a trigger? Were they the trigger? And once you can look at those things objectively and unemotionally and say, okay, this is what I did, and I know I need to work on this, and I'm not going to do this anymore. But these are the things that I know that right now I'm not in a space to be able to handle. So once you get to that point, if you're going to start a new relationship, you basically have two options. Either accept that you're not ready, or let them know this list of boundaries pretty much right up front of things that you've already figured out, that look, this is where my line is. I can handle some of this, but this is where my line is. You cannot do this to me and expect the relationship to be successful. And I know that it's difficult because, especially when you end a relationship, not everybody really wants to be alone, right? I mean, there's people that say, I don't mind, I don't need somebody. But in reality, we all need even friends, and these rules apply to friends just the same as romantic relationships. Now, with your family, obviously, you're not going to stand there at 2 years old and, tell your parents things or your siblings things. So it's a little bit difficult. The thing I have found about family is overwhelmingly there's going to be two dynamics that are in play here. And it could be, a round robin of who has these characteristics. But you're going to inevitably have somebody in your scope that thinks there's nothing completely wrong with them, that they have it all completely figured out, and that the only way that they know how to handle anything when somebody gives them a complaint is to disparage the complainer, tell them get their head out of their ass, grow up, suck it up, be a man, pull it up by your bootstraps, whatever it is. You're always going to have that one person. And then usually you're going to have somebody who at all costs, and I mean at all costs, will attempt to avoid conflict. You're going to have that person somewhere in that dynamic where no matter what happens, no matter what you tell them, no matter what is done to you or about you, or no matter how you explain it to them, their number one goal is to avoid conflict, even if that means throwing you under the bus or lying or just completely lacking the ability to admit to anything. Now, in those situations, you can't pick your parents, you can't pick your siblings, you can't pick your aunts and uncles and all of that, right? You're born into it. And one thing that happens is that as you start to get into those teen years and you start to recognize the things that you're willing to put up with and to not put up with, if your family is not receptive to that, that's going to be extremely difficult. Now, I know in my case, to be personal, there was a few people who were very receptive to it and some who were not. And overwhelmingly, the situation that you have to find is that everybody's going to have their line of how much they can take and how long they're going to take it. And as you grow and as you get older and as you set more and more boundaries, people are going to fall off and fall away, or they're going to grow themselves because they really want to, still be in your life and move towards you. But the family dynamic is a little bit differently because, you know, you're not really going to go out and get a new family, right? So you're kind of stuck with the one that you have. And that is the only case where you really are going to have to make that hard and fast choice at some point. If you feel like you're being abused, eventually you'll have to get to the point where you realize that you've moved on from caring about it and you've let it go, but at the same point, that doesn't mean staying in the abusive relationship. More times than not, what that means is you finally get to a point where you realize that those people are not going to change. They are going to abuse you, and they are not going to recognize or acknowledge that they're abusing you. And you have two options. You can accept the abuse and keep them in your life, or you can move them out of your life. And you know, I think the bottom line there is that I think what you choose to do in your regular relationships is going to be what you choose to do in your family relationships. So if you're the type of person that's going to stay in an abusive friendship or an abusive love relationship, you're probably going to continue to allow whatever your family member is abusing you to do so. And if you get to the point where, you know, you're getting rid of anybody, your friends, love relationships that are abusing you, and you've said, you know what, enough, I'm done, enough, I'm done, eventually you're going to probably get there with your family as well, and it's disappointing, but at the same point, we're all on our own journey, and some people just get stuck. You know, some people just get absolutely stuck where they are, and they don't want to hear or see anything else, and you can't get through to them, and you have to protect yourself at some point. So, but overwhelmingly, the main point of the video is to set boundaries, especially with love and friend relationships. Obviously, that takes a lot of inner work. It takes a lot of personal growth to gain that confidence, to be able to stand there and say, this is me, this is who I am, this is how I am, I'm worth it, don't treat me this way. And when you're ready to do that, at the beginning of a relationship, that's the relationship, that person that's going to flourish for you. They're the ones that are going to be there for you when the shit gets real. And, you know, those are the relationships that you want to keep in your life. And the ones that don't respect your boundaries, to the curb, boot them. So, all right, that's enough for that. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Please subscribe to the YouTube channel. Please share the videos if you like them. That's the best thing that you can do to help us. We're trying to grow the business. We're trying to grow the community. And so when you guys share the videos, that really tells YouTube that you like the videos, and then they show it to more people. And don't forget to check out the website. It's lightworkforlightworkers.com. I am a medium, I'm an intuitive, and my partner Karen, she's also an intuitive, and she does a great job with the human design. So we do a bunch of different type of readings where we'll combine my channeling and my messages with her intuition and human design. Everybody who has gotten one so far has been head over heels. And we've got a review up on the Facebook group right now for one of the most recent readings we've done. The Facebook group is lightworkforlightworkers.com. Join the group, subscribe to the channel, and thank you all for watching, and I will see you in the next video.